30 years of direct international and domestic experience in global supply chain management.
To me, it is very evident the world is evolving really fast, especially after COVID and the tariff issue.
The most overlooked metrics in this case is that companies overlook and the risk gets deeper for them during these times.
I think overlook right now a lot is regulatory because a lot of those is going to involve legal and make sure your legal team is involved.
That's some good insight, right? Welcome, everyone, to the Vserve Ebusiness Solution podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of the great industry experts to talk about their experiences and gather some helpful tips along the way. I'm Cynthia, and today we are joined by an incredible guest with over 30 years of direct international and domestic experience in global supply chain management. He's a true expert in end-to-end supply chain strategy, procurement, logistics, and regulatory compliance. With a deep background in global sourcing across diverse regions and sectors, please welcome our guest for today, Peter Wong. Peter, it's a pleasure to have you here today. How are you?
I am well. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you so much for inviting me, sharing my experience.
Same here. We're very excited to hear from you and learn from the depth of knowledge you have. And I obviously start with the same question with everyone. Please walk us through your journey. How did you join this supply chain industry? How did you become a leader? What kind of drove you, I think, for global sourcing for yourself? Where did it all start and where are you now?
Yeah, to me, I think I call it fate. I graduated in the United States. I was originally born and raised in Malaysia, went to school here. After I graduated, I actually went back and my job put me in the supply chain perspective. Like you get in the past 30 years, I consider myself fortunate to be able to be involved in every segment of the end-to-end supply chain, both domestic and international. So I have some working knowledge, establish a lot of SOP policy on how to do supply chain more effectively. So to me, it is very evident the world is evolving really fast, especially after COVID and the tariff issue. People are traveling more. You have social media. A lot of brands are expanding overseas. Local regional brand are expanding to the US. And I like to use the term now, it's called globalization / regionalization / localization. That's where supply chain need to be very innovative and they need to adapt. So supply chain leadership, to me, I think we have to focus on development of people because people bring knowledge. And once they see a development, a growth path, that will bring their positive work to expand it. So you have to trust your team to develop. You set clear expectation. To me, autonomy is good because nowadays people like to do things at their own pace. They don't want to be managed anymore. It's strange that I look at it in my dad's generation, you follow what the company tells you. Nowadays, people mentality are changing. They are starting to bring themselves into the work. And you provide constructive feedback. You have to make sure that you listen to understand, accept the idea, communicate, and most importantly, people like to be recognized. Recognize your people. If they do a job, I think it's only fair you recognize them. So the leadership philosophy that I find that it works for me is democratic, which is participative, transformational. Coaching is what a lot of people is saying now. I need coaching so that I can move my career forward. And a term that a lot of people is starting to use right now is called servant leadership and visionary. How do you provide that vision to your team? So this is what supply chain is leading to, and this is what people are looking for.
Yeah, definitely. I love how you use those words that people want to manage themselves. I know I'm from that era as well. I love to be in control, manage my own time. And thankfully, my company gives me that space. So I completely agree with you. Leadership in today's world is very important. From your career over the years, especially in food and retail sector, how has international strategies, sourcing especially, evolved over your career time period? How have you seen that?
Yeah, when I first moved back to the US and started in the food industry, US used to be the centric of global in terms of standardization. Once you see a FDA, everybody is going to approve it. It's a norm. Yep. And food brands in the US are considered premium. They are the industry leader, trendy, the industrial standard. I have stated above like globalization, regionalization, and localization. disrupted the whole thing.
Yep.
Especially localization are the new key trend now. So it is very evident in the local supply chain that a lot of things is seeing more of this. So even many of the US brands are feeling the effect. They are being marginalized. And then the other big one is politics, is another element that is hurting many of the US brands. So the inability, or sometimes I call it the unwillingness of a lot of US brands to proactively adapt to globalization, regionalization, or localization is a key element that is hurting the industry. And that's why we are seeing as sales and even market that we are going to decreasing.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you there. So what are some of your proven approaches that you've used in your career that you say reduces costs, but you also maintain the compliance and quality while sourcing?
Yeah, again, I think I'm going to go back to the same thing, globalization, regionalization, and localization. That is something I have been pushing for the past couple of years. To me, is the key. So many companies or suppliers, even in the US right now, they see that trend coming. And most of them that I'm working with has already localized or regionalized their production, like tapping into their resources is a key element, is one of the key elements to cost reduction. Because if you regionalization and localization, you will see a reduced ingredient cost, sourcing cost, logistically, you will see a cost savings. Lead time, you will see a more lead time, and satisfactory local customer taste preference. We take that into account because, like I said, the US centric is no longer viable because of people are traveling now. They are more versed, and it improves the shelf life and ensuring the meeting, most importantly, the local regulation. Because right now, every country is protecting their own, and their own regulation is very strict. Like when I was doing chocolate, we can call it chocolate here, but in EU, if you don't have 25% cocoa in your product, you cannot call it chocolate. So those are all the regulations that we need to understand. And then the other one is the commodity. How do you work on commodity? Because the suppliers want to be your partner. So commodity is one area that we should be working with them in terms of cost saving and adapt to the local ingredient, because this is what the local prefer. Like I said, the US centric, unfortunately, is already been marginalized, and people prefer more towards local brand. So if you do travel now, you will see a lot of the local brand are actually expanding and coming overseas. So that is what I'm seeing. So for supply chain people, we need to make sure that we understand it, we adapt.
According to you, which is one of the most overlooked metrics in this cases that companies overlook and the risk gets deeper for them during these times?
I think overlooked right now a lot is regulatory, because we were thinking that the US holds the standard for the globe, and whatever applies in the US applies globally. In the past, yes, I agree. 10 years ago, 100%. But now with that, everybody is coming into their own. A lot of that is changing. And another one is the taste profile. We need to take that into account because people now have more choices. They travel more, they have more choices. The economy has improved. Now they have more income that they can, more spendable income. So these are all playing into it. So we just need to make sure that we understand the market dynamic and capture what the new trend is.
Perfect. According to you, especially when it comes to industrial distributors, how do they supposed to navigate these tariff regulations, especially now we can see it's so evident, and still maintain that reliable supply chain overall globally? How do companies do that nowadays?
I think now the company in the past, they just do it because it has to be done. But now I tell the company it has to be done deliberately. You have to have somebody internally that is doing it. And that's why a lot of us is working with external resources right now, like third-party consultant to help us, because this is something that can make or break when you enter the market. I was at Krispy Kreme, we try to go to Spain. You can't call your product donut because the donut trademark register has been taken. So those are all the regulations that you want to do. And when you want to explain globally, make sure you register your brand globally. So I think these are things that have to be done more deliberate. And you have to make sure that when you work with a local country, work with a local expert and do a full review and get your legal team to be involved, because a lot of those is going to involve legal, and make sure your legal team is involved.
That's some good insight, right? Get your legal team involved nowadays before doing all those major changes, I guess. So when it comes to sustainability, right, in sourcing especially, how do companies integrate it, like practically nowadays? But there are so many resources out there. How do these companies practically work on these areas? How do they integrate these services?
Yeah, sustainability sourcing is gaining momentum across the industry right now. So even
Yeah.
many financial institutions and investors that I'm seeing is making that as a requirement. So it means we have to integrate our environmental stewardship, social equity, and economic viability into the process of selecting the goods that you are purchasing and the service for the supplier. So you want to ensure that there's a transparency and long-term resilience to the supply chain. So company can integrate these practices into their activity by establishing clear sustainability criteria and collaborating with suppliers by conducting regular audit of supplier, assuring that they are meeting the environmental, social standard, checking for adherence for fair labor practice, and monitoring carbon emission production. So these are all coming into effect. And a lot of the companies that I'm working on right now is actually requiring that we are submitting them. I think it's a good step forward for us because we need to protect our sources.
But there are so many studies out there, Peter, that we read, right? So many companies out there struggling to balance their overall cost savings, control their outsourcing logistic functions. So in your view, what is some of the smartest ways to structure these outsourcing without giving up your overall operational oversight to these companies?
I think to me, the cost saving like outsourcing is one thing, like you mentioned right now. Outsourcing is a big topic, like third-party manufacturing, third-party warehousing. Because right now, the way that the world is set up is there's a lot of expert in this field. So you want to make sure that you tap into the expert in those fields and work with them because internally, you will never be able to afford to have all the experts in different fields working in the company. So you just have to make sure that you do that deliberately, have somebody manage it, and work with those companies because tap into their resources because they are doing it on a grand scale. So they have a lot of bandwidth that we are able to tap into their savings and bring that back to the company. So that is one way that I'll be looking at it.
We do see a shift of a lot of companies, especially by 2025. Some of the reports state that mid-sized companies, especially, they're shifting to more of a multi-country sourcing versus taking it all to one company. So it helps them to support their functions, reduce their operational risk, and obviously, like we were talking about, agility, right? It improves their agility over time. So from your perspective, what are some of the services that is better, like sourcing wise, like back office functions that companies most urgently are trying to decentralize or even outsource, right? So according to you, what are they doing wrong and what can they do right when they're outsourcing to these multi-companies?
I think company, before they do that, they have to analyze internally what is their strength, what can they do? Because a lot of time we understand the concept of what things need to be done, but on the application side, they are weak, they don't have enough knowledge. So I think this is what the first thing we have to do. Once you establish what is needed, then you have to reach out third-party sources. I think in the past, it's more there's a shame. Oh, yeah, I can't do it. I have to get somebody to help me. There is no shame because this is what those people are set out to do. So I think we just need to make sure that we tap into their resources, make sure that we understand what is the requirement. But internally, I think supply chain is not as simple as in the past right now because I see that a lot of research is needed. I joined so many seminars and linked to so many organizations just to learn because it changes every day. Tariff is a prime example. If you don't keep on top of it every day, you will be lost. Today's news is past. You have to look at what is going to be happening tomorrow. So I think this is something that the company really need to look into is like, how do I make sure that I fully understand what is out there? Research, one thing is just tap into the resources. And unfortunately, company nowadays, they are beginning to see that benefit. They have to budget because there's a keyword budget for that. Because that is going to bring you benefit because I call it intangible and tangible. So tangible is the money has been spent. Intangible is if you don't do it, if you have a bad reputation, a bad batch of goods, it's going to spoil your reputation. It's going to take you years to recover. So you can't see what is the damage in there. So I think that's something that a lot of companies are seeing it and they are willing to invest in it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point that you bring up. But there's still a lot of stigma behind outsourcing your services, like you mentioned. What have you done I would love to hear a company that you've worked for that has had the stigma of outsourcing their services, especially these kind of services, and how have you talked them into it? What have you done?
Yeah, I think the one thing that came to mind is when I joined a company, in the past, nobody looked at commodity. So they
Yeah.
look at commodity as something that a lot of people buy, and then commodity on that what goes with commodity is I call it open book costing. So you need to be able to work with supplier on the open book costing so that you know exactly what each segment of the cost is, and the only unknown is the commodity. So I think that is one segment that a lot of company is also starting to pay dividend, look into right now, because commodity, you rely on your internal sources. I work with a lot of company. Internal sources, they are limited to what they know. When I was doing flour, I know I spoke to at least 10 companies in the US globally on commodity. What do they know about flour globally, regionally, locally? So what do they know? How can they help us? How can I make sure that if I look at commodity three months down the road, I can use that information, come back to my analysis, and do a very educated guess of what I should be buying. Is should I cover for a month? Should I cover for 2 months? Should I cover for 3 months? So I think commodity is the one thing that I'm really focused on right now, because I see this is a big savings. Because commodity is usually the big ingredient. They can account for 70 to 80% of your cost. So if you are able to manage it, again, and it needs to be budget, because the company that will work with you on a commodity is not cheap. They charge you a lot of money because they know that the service provide brings a lot of value, and we do treasure that value. So out of the 10, 15 companies I talk with, I end up working with three, one for each market, because nobody is global. Don't tell me that, oh, I'm good globally. Anywhere in the market you ask me about flour, I'm good. No, it doesn't happen that way, because flour are grown in different part of the world. And in the US, you are good at US. Australian, you are good Australian. EU, you are good at EU. So make sure you understand what you want, and then set out a strategy or how do I accomplish it, and then just keep on top of it. So that's what I do. I find that it's paying dividends.
That's amazing. That's a really new perspective of looking at it, right? The commodity aspect of it. I've never heard anybody talk about it that way. So it's really interesting to hear that. And while I'm learning about supply chain as I'm going along, I've been hearing some great insights into how you guys have helped over the years. So there's one thing that you have mentioned earlier. It's about globalization, regionalization, and localization. So I've heard a lot about globalization. I've heard a little bit about regionalization, but the localization thing is a new word that I'm hearing somebody bring up. I know you've been working on it for a while. So give us a backstory about how you came up with that and why is it so significant in supply chain industry?
Yeah, I think to me, supply chain, everything is about volume. Without volume, we cannot do much and we cannot negotiate. So when I say regionalization, because you want to make sure that you consolidate all the volume in one region like Asia, and then you look at the trade duty, the trade treaty that each region has. Like Asia, there's an APEC. But if you trade amongst the APEC region, you don't have to pay tax when you import products. So that in itself can be a 15-20% savings. So when you try to regionalize it, you look at it that way. How do I, right now, look at the map, I actually divide out my globe world into different regions. There's 5 regions, and then look at the treaty of their sign and see which country is in that treaty. So that is called regionalization. So localization just means that you, in that region, you identify one local supplier. So that local supplier maybe is one, maybe it's two, can be the regional supplier. So once you establish your region, then you start looking at the local. Who is the local player that will be able to provide you that service? So I think that in itself, that's the import tariff. A lot of people sometimes don't realize how big it is. 15-20% can be a lot of money. And then shipping from the US to wherever is going to take 4 weeks. And the container cost is $5,000 versus you don't have to pay maybe less than $1,000 if you ship it in the region. And then there's a shorter shelf life, that shorter lead time. You don't have to wait 2 months. It can be 2 weeks. So that's why I look at it as look at it globally, and then you regionalize it. What region can be clustered into one group? And then once you do that, then you look at locally in that region, who is the best supplier.
Wow. Okay. So this kind of trick actually, does it work back ways as well? Like you start localizing first, like you start locally, then you go regional, then you go global, or does it only work one way?
To me, it works one way, because you have to, like I say, you have to understand what region is in one group, like the APEC. There's only that many countries in APEC. And in EU, there's also many countries in EU. So if you work anything outside of EU, it doesn't help you because it's still considered
Mm.
outside of EU. And when you bring anything from outside into EU, you still pay all your import tariff. You have to make your local regulatory requirement. You trade within EU. You don't have to do that because they all meet the regulation.
Okay. That makes, wow, that's some interesting point there. Perfect. I know I've learned a lot today. The new terms that you have taught, the new tricks. So it's really good to hear about all of these things. And before I wrap the things up, I know I always ask these questions is what is that one piece of advice that you would give out to new business owners, sourcing heads, future leaders in the supply chain industry when they're trying to scale globally, like without losing control? What is that one trick that's going to save them?
To me, I would say having the right personnel to manage, adaptability, open-minded, do your research, and understand your market and products. Now, the idea that the world is a flat for business is popularized by Thomas Friedman's book. It refers to the concept of increased globalization and the level of competitiveness playing field due to technological advancement and interconnectivity. So that means for business, regardless of your location, you're going to face increases in competition from a wider global player. So adaptation, making intentional effort and stay vigilant to me is the key moving forward.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Peter. This was an incredibly insightful conversation. I know I've learned some new things for the global supply chain for sure. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. I hope it was as insightful for you as well as it was for us.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be able to share my experience.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll connect with you again. And thank you.
I look forward to. Thank you. Have a great rest of the week.
You too.